She was going to have to explain it. Maybe you're right. Maybe some of the British would buy it. Large, big, the housekeeper said sourly. The September sunset came at 7. Rebecca shooed the younger children up the stairs, giggling and excited at the prospect of sleeping in the best bed. With her watching, they washed, donned nightcaps and gowns, and then scrambled gleefully up the steps to the bed. Aren't you coming too, Rebecca? You said you were sleeping here too. Are you going to come to bed with us? In a minute, she had discovered a new problem. How was she going to know when 10 o'clock arrived? The big grandfather clock in the downstairs hall was stopped. The German clockmaker who came every week to wind it had fled to a cousin's farm in Chester County 10 days before. The timepiece had run down. Besides, what with all the excitement of the day, she was more weary than usual, her eyelids already drooping. What if she slept through? And then she thought, if I go down to the tunnel mouth now, it won't matter whether I doze off or not. Go to sleep, you two. I think I'll help Ursula clean up. Oh, Rebecca, you said, be still, Amelia, and go to sleep. I'll be with you before you know it. They settled down grumblingly, and she slipped out and closed the door behind her. Then she crept down the stairs and tiptoed into the darkened parlor where she waited, trying not to breathe, as Ursula made finishing up noises in the kitchen. From its reigning position over the mantel, her grandfather's portrait surveyed her stuffily. Really, it didn't look at all like the tough old rapscallion. At last, footsteps scraped on the kitchen stairs, a door closed, and the steps went past the parlor door and up the stairs to the second floor, then up the ladder to the garret. Far at the top of the house, another door closed. Rebecca gave it 5 more minutes for good measure, then tiptoed out of the parlor and down the hall. Behind the stairs was the door to the serving pantry, where steps led to the basement. She crept down them, easing her weight with care, and stood with pounding heart in the empty kitchen. It was pitch black, except for a pink glow from the dank cooking fire. How still the house was. Much stiller, it seemed to her, than when she lay listening to it in her cozy bed. Not even street noises penetrated. She gave herself a shake. First, she told herself wistfully, light a candle at the fire. Second, find flint and steel and put the candle in the lantern. Third, get Ursula's old marketing cloak from the hook because it's going to be cold down there. Fourth, well, do the first 3 and then we'll see. Her preparations made, she went into the laundry room and lifted the trap door that covered the tunnel entrance. Damp air stirred against her face, bringing the faint, fishy smell of brackish water. She held her candle over the hole. It certainly was inky black, worse than the kitchen. All Philadelphia knew about the Ransom Tunnel nowadays. But it once had been a deep, dark secret, well kept for many years. Her father had dug it himself with the help of 3 husky shipmates, and shored up the walls and ceiling with ship timbers. It ran all the way from the house to the Delaware, emerging under the shelter of what had once been the William Morris Wharf. The pier was old and decrepit now, creaking and sagging underfoot as you walked, but it had once been the busiest in the city. It was the easiest thing in the world to offload unduties silks and Dutch tea by night, hustle them straight into the tunnel, and store them there till it was time to have a quiet little sale that the preventive officers knew nothing about. And now, after years of lying empty or being used as a playroom by the young Ransoms, the tunnel was about to have secrets again. Rebecca took a deep breath to steady her nerve, clutched mantle, lantern, and tinderbox tightly, and started down the ladder. Once she was actually in the tunnel proper, it seemed less scary. She set off toward the river, picking her way with care, for the tunnel ran sharply downhill, following the conformation of the surface. There lay the 5 big wine casks, all covered with dust and cobwebs, where the brandy was stored. Not directly in the casks themselves, which had always been mere blinds, but in its own kegs inside the cask, stowed away through the detachable fronts. Would-be searchers for contraband wrapped the hollow casks, tried the caps, and went away satisfied that they were empty. And here, gleaming faintly in the starlight, was the Delaware. Rebecca put out her candle and curled up on the damp floor, leaning her back against the timber shoring. It was a good thing she'd taken precautions, for she fell asleep instantly. What woke her was the soft thud of a boat snubbing against the piling. "Will?" she whispered, was answered by a faint shh. There was movement in the darkness beside her, then a faint scraping. They were beaching the ship's boat in the tunnel proper. "Will, listen," she said. "Something's happened. You can't leave that stuff here now. We're going to have an officer in the house." The large loomed up beside her. For one terrified moment she thought, "It isn't Will." But then it spoke in her brother's voice. "What are you talking about?" "No, not here. Let's go farther into the tunnel. Did you bring the lantern?" "Good." Halfway up the tunnel, Will scratched flint and steel until the candle wick caught. The light could not be seen from here because of the slope of the ground, and then demanded the whole story. His face changed as she poured out her tale of woe. "So if you just wait here, I'll run up and get the papers, and you can go back down river and rendezvous with father and try to deliver it to Charleston." He said. He walked to and fro, chewing his lips. There was a footstep behind him, and another figure loomed up in the lantern light. "Teddy!" Rebecca cried and ran to hug the grinning seaman. "Hello, Miss Becky. You're looking very pretty for the middle of the night." He was an old Conestoga Indian. Teddy was the closest whites could get to his long Indian name, who had gone to sea with her grandfather in his youth, and for the last 30 years had served as her father's coxswain. 60 years old, he still had all his front teeth, and could reef in a howling gale without batting an eye. "What do you think, Teddy?" Will said. "Tell him about it, Rebecca." When she had repeated the story, Teddy immediately shook his head. "No, officers or not, this is still the safest place. That whole coast is crawling with frigates." "True," Will put in. "I helped fit those hiding holes myself, and they went a good many years without being discovered. If Miss Becky keeps the secret, there's no reason why the British should find the things." Easy enough to talk lightly about keeping secrets. It had taken every ounce of willpower Rebecca possessed just to get through this one day. "You mean you won't take the papers back? I have to keep them?" "Teddy's right," Will said. "Under the circumstances, this is the best arrangement we can make. The officers being in the house might even be a good thing. Last place they'd look for contraband would be right under their noses. First, the bandmaster. Now Will. Everybody trying to convince her that it was for her own good to have officers in the house. But Will," he patted her arm, "you'll do just fine. Come on, Teddy, let's get these ingots unloaded." She watched in dismay as the men carried armloads of lead ingots from the boat to the ladder. They made an enormous pile. She wondered how the two of them could have rowed such a heavy load all the way up from the Capes. "It seems silly," she said. "Why didn't you leave these with the rest at Henlopen?" "Oh, ball is always needed," Teddy said. "The stairs the best place, do you think, Will?" "Yes." Working neatly and fast, like the seamen they were, they rigged block and tackle to a hook in the ceiling of the laundry room, fastened a small cargo net to it, loaded the ingots, and hauled up. Then Teddy, with an armful, headed for the stairs leading up from the kitchen, where he squatted down before the bottom step. He took hold of the edge of the tread and pulled on it, and the tread slid off smoothly on well-soaked grooves, revealing a box-like space a foot deep and 2 feet long. It just held 2 ingots. With the tread back in place, it looked as innocent as any staircase in Pennsylvania. As Will brought armloads of ingots from the laundry room, Teddy moved methodically up the staircase, throwing 2 ingots in each step. "Well, that's it," the old man said at the top. "We'll have to put the rest in the hall stairs." "Oh, please, Will, please don't. You'll wake Ursula." She caught at his arm, causing him to lose his grip on an ingot, which went crashing to the stone floor and skidded. "Talk about me waking Ursula," he grumbled as he picked it up. But Rebecca was not listening. The skid had dug a deep groove in the leg, and even in the dim lantern light, she could see that the material at the bottom of the groove was not gray, but yellow. "That isn't lead," she said numbly. "That's gold."
Mother's Room, Chapter 4. Teddy and Will exchanged despairing glances. "She'll have to know now," the old Indian said. "Right." But though they both turned to Rebecca, neither of them seemed able to get started. "Gold!" she repeated incredulously. "You're storing lead-coated gold in our house?" 3 million liras worth," Will acknowledged. "It's a loan from the French king. Nobody knows about it but Father, Teddy, and me, not even the rest of the crew. And now you, of course." "It's really gold?" "It's got to be kept secret. Do you understand, Rebecca? As secret as the grave." Even in the midst of her shock, Rebecca was aware of something cockeyed. But why did you bring it here, to this country? Europe is where the supplies are, or St. Eustatius. Why not borrow the money and spend it right in France?" "It's not for spending. It's for shoring up the currency. Without it, our paper money would be worthless. The letter I gave you explains all that. The letter from Franklin to Morris. Oh, gold. 3,000,000 liras in gold. It was unimaginable. Come on, Teddy, let's get the rest of it put away. Rebecca, you go upstairs, and if Ursula stirs or one of the children, don't let them come out into the hall. Dutifully, her head still swimming with confusion, Rebecca took her stand in the upper hall to act as lookout. Will tiptoed back and forth with the ingots, while Teddy knelt and, with infinite caution, eased the treads open. 2 steps from the top, they stored away the last of the ingots. All 3 sighed with relief. Downstairs in the kitchen once more, Will turned to Rebecca. Now you've got the button? Yes, you're all right. Keep it on you. Wear it on a ribbon or something. You can tell people it's a keepsake. We'll try to get word through General Washington that the gold is here and he's to send an agent. Of course, if the huntress is taken, he shrugged. Well, do your best. As long as the British don't discover the gold, it won't matter too much how long it stays there. It didn't matter to him, maybe. A moment later, he and Teddy were climbing down the ladder to the tunnel. And remember, Will concluded, his top half projecting from the hole, don't tell anyone. Then he vanished, and she eased the trapdoor back in place. She had just put away the lantern and tinderbox and hung up Ursula's cloak when she remembered. She'd forgotten to ask Will for money again. Rebecca spent a restless, anxious night, full of dreams that wore her out, but could not be remembered when she woke up. Her first conscious thought was gold. Old staircase is full of King Louis's gold. She dressed hastily and went out into the hall and stared at the stairs. They looked just the same. But could she possibly go weeks, perhaps months, without telling anyone their secret? There was a loud rattle on the front door. Ursula was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, so Rebecca hurried down to answer it. On the doorstep stood a very small soldier with a very large pack saddle and a pair of saddlebags. He managed, despite his load, to doff his cocked hat. Morning, miss. I'm Stowe, Captain Cargill's batman. I've brought the baggage, like. Captain Cargill? The one who's billeted on us? Yes, miss. The captain will come round later. All right, come in. He edged past her, smiling warily, as if afraid of giving offense. Come, she thought, brightening. This isn't so bad. Up the stairs, right-hand back bedroom. Thank you kindly, miss. He lugged his burdens up the stairway and vanished into the back room that used to be Rebecca's, where she heard him making unpacking noises. An hour later, when they were all eating their breakfast, mush in the kitchen, the captain himself arrived. Rebecca, guessing who the knocker would be, told Ursula to stay where she was and went to the door. Cargill, Captain 55th, snapped the man who stood there, and she took an instant, unreasoning dislike to him. Yes, sir, your man arrived. He's upstairs now. He was a rather large man, and everything about him was pale orange hair, pale orange lashes, pale orange freckles, even pale orange pupils to his slightly prominent eyes. He brushed past her without another word and clattered up the stairs, his sword banging against the banisters as he went. Rebecca saw him glance into the room where Stowe was, frowned, pushed open the door of Mother's room, and called to the batman, Here, you fool, you've got the wrong room. I'll have this one. Rebecca flew up the stairs and put herself between the room and the captain. You can't have that one. We're sleeping there, my sister, my brother, and I. He raised his pale orange brows. Blank, your impudence. Where's your mistress? Mistress, what do you mean? Your mistress, your mother, whoever's in charge. I'm mistress, I mean. Well, if anyone is in charge, it's me. A chit of a girl. Mother is dead and father's at sea. The only other relatives we have are way off in Connecticut somewhere. Spare me the genealogy, he said with disdain. It you're in charge, kindly remove your belongings from this room. And be quick about it, so my man can get me settled. But that's our room. No longer, I do assure you. He turned his back, sauntered into Mother's room, and wandered about examining it. Colonial rubbish, he sneered at the mantel candlestick. They're English. John Gilpin. Except to condemn her impudence again, he paid no attention. Rebecca stood irresolute. What to do? She couldn't physically bar him from the chamber, even if it were possible to handle a king's officer in occupied Philadelphia. Could she go over his head? She recalled an incident John had written home about from Roxbury. In winter, Boston boys liked to make snow slides on the common to toboggan down. During the occupation, some of the regulars, to tease the youngsters, would break up the slides as fast as they were made. The angry boys took their case directly to General Gage, and he gave orders that the destruction was to stop. Of course, that had happened before hostilities had actually commenced, and anyway, Gage was an easygoing man, but it just might work with Cornwallis too. She was hesitant. Venture into a British general's headquarters? How could she possibly work up the nerve? What are you standing there for? The officer barked. I told you to start clearing out your belongings. She turned her gaze on him. He was standing before the chest on chest, his hand on an open drawer. She thought, the papers are in there. I can't take the chance of his finding them. Not just yet, she said, and ran down the stairs. She took off her checked apron, adjusted her cap before the parlor mirror. She wished she could dress her hair in curls and rolls instead of this dumb old pigtail. She wished she had hoops and stays. She wished her dress were a bit longer so she wouldn't look so much like a servant. Should she change into her best lawn? No, that was even shorter than the blue worsted gown she wore for every day. She had been growing awfully fast lately. Well, the worsted would have to do. I'll take Peter, she thought. He'll be something to hang on to for courage. She went downstairs to the kitchen, explained about Captain Gargle to the tune of Ursula's indignant outcries, spirited 4-year-old Peter away. Now listen, Peter, she said as they were walking up Front Street. We're going to see the English general, and when we get there you are to be on your best behavior, understand? I don't want to go, he yelled, jerking his hand free from her grasp. They'll eat me up. Don't be silly. You mustn't listen to Ursula's stories. They're English. They don't eat people. You want to go on sleeping in Mother's room, don't you? Well, then, you've got to help. He subsided somewhat, though still frightened. That was all to the good, as far as Rebecca was concerned. Peter, who was still in petticoats, looked very appealing when he was scared. They passed the house where the door swung idly open, and a quick glance inside revealed a ransacked look. So they were looting empty houses, just as Tom had predicted. Stores were still closed, she noticed, though that was understandable. They probably had little to sell. With the Delaware obstructed by the downriver force, even the British were hard up for provisions. The streets were certainly full of soldiers. More troops must have arrived overnight. A pair of red-coated dragoons clip-clopped by, red plumes jousting from the peaks of their little helmets. Rebecca realized with a start that they were British. Unusual, most cavalry on both sides were Americans. As they turned into Chestnut Street, they began to encounter blue-coated artillerymen and kilted Highlanders. Peter's fear began to fade before curiosity. Look at those funny-looking ladies, he said. Don't point, Peter. Those aren't ladies. They're Scotsmen, said Rebecca, doing a bit of goggling herself. She'd never seen a kilt before either. Why are they wearing skirts? That's how men dress in Scotland. Why? I don't know. They just do. And funny hats, too. One or two wore the ordinary cap of a grenadier, but most sported a queer muffin-shaped affair with a broad checked band. They eyed Rebecca expressionlessly as she approached, and she had chilly thoughts of rising of the rising 45 in the charge of the clans and the moss troopers over the border. People who'd been imprisoned in the hulk reported that Scots guards were much harsher than English. She shivered and hustled Peter past the lounging men. As they trudged up Chestnut Street, Rebecca found her feet lagging. How was she going to know which one was Cornwallis? Maybe instead it would be better to ask for Captain Hargreaves. At least she knew him, and he'd been, she thought in retrospect, now that she'd met Captain Scargill, rather decent. Quite decent, in fact, when you consider that he could have been like, what he could have been like if he wanted. But no, a captain couldn't give orders to a captain. It was the commanding officer or nobody. She pushed herself on. Here's the Norris house. Stay close to me, Peter. It was unheeded advice. He had her skirt unneeded advice. He had her skirt fast in both hands and kept trying to bury his face in her side. And then, after all, the general had moved to the Reeves house at 1:42 seconds. The Norris's maid told them. Mrs. Norris had complained of the noise in the crowd. So the general could be obliging. That was good news. Rebecca walked on with a lighter step. She could tell which was the Reeves house before she'd even crossed the 3rd Street arch over Dock Creek. The area swarmed with soldiers, all in a continual bustle. Aides and orderlies coming and going, lines of horses picketed at the sidewalk posts, sentries at half the doors in Spruce Street. The pair at the Reeves house itself, she noted in dismay, were Highlanders, the muffin kind, and gigantic. She stopped. Well, maybe those stories the English told about wild Highlanders were exaggerated, or maybe these had been tamed. No sense hanging about all day, she told herself. Get it over with. Taking a firmer grip on Peter's hand, for he was hanging back now, making himself heavy, and had to be dragged, she marched sturdily up to the door. She picked out the slightly less towering of the two sentries and announced, I want to see General Cornwallis, please. He blinked down at her. Eh? I have to see the general. It's important. The two sentries exchanged glances over her head. Then the one she'd addressed said, What would your name be, miss? My name. Rebecca. She stopped, touched by inspiration. Rebecca McGregor. And before the forthright Peter could protest, she could see he was about to. She clamped his hand over his mouth under the pretext of clutching him to her. The sentries exchanged glances again, amused this time. The first one winked. Important information, you say? We'll not be taking the chance of keeping important information by the general, eh, Donald? Donald evidently agreed, for they moved their muskets aside and let her pass. She said from the doorway, What does General Cornwallis look like? Eh? You'll ken the man by the great gold epaulet. Thank you. Inside every room seemed to swarm with red coats, gold lace. Outside, officers went unpowdered and strode about with muddy boots. Here, all was polish and elegance. Rebecca peeked gingerly into the parlor, which was filled with young officers, all scratching away at papers of some kind, backed out and looked around undecided. And then, by a bit of luck, she caught sight of a stately gentleman descending the stairs in company with two young officers. On either shoulder he wore enormous epaulets, dripping with bullion. Before she lost her nerve, Rebecca darted forward and bobbed a curtsy. Please, sir, are you General Cornwallis? He reared back. Eh? She thought, oh my goodness, I forgot he's an earl. How do you dress an earl? Confusion over that point so rattled her that she started to babble. I have a favor to ask, please. It's terribly important to us because you see it was Mother's room. It's all the best furniture there, and he isn't very careful what he does with his sword. Bless my soul, soul, what is all this? It's mother's room, you see, sir, and now he's gone and taken it. And there's no need because we have two perfectly good rooms in the back, but he insisted and was mean and nasty. And I thought if I came to you, maybe you'd tell him he had to move out so we can have the room back. So I came to you. His lordship, though not very tall, was a gentleman of full figure, and Rebecca found herself hypnotized by that vast expanse of white waistcoat. He was turning piteously to the aide. Rawdon, can you make sense of what this child is saying? She doubtless seeks a favor of some kind, my lord. Shall I take the young person aside and get to the bottom of it? Yes, do. There's a good fellow. He stepped around Rebecca with his other aide, headed for the front door. Over his shoulder he added casually, grant the favor if you can. The elegant young aide was vastly bored with it all. He took Rebecca to the back part of the hall. Now tell me, he yawned, begin at the beginning. She took a deep breath. Now that she was out of the paralyzing presence of the Earl, she could think straight. Some days later she learned that that aide was also titled, indeed, that he had a pedigree so long and distinguished that by comparison the Cornwallises were mere jump-up pervenus. But at the time she was in comfortable ignorance. Well, they've quartered this officer on it. Captain Cargill, she began. The rest came easily. Captain Rawdon came slowly to attention, disbelief spreading over his face as the tale proceeded. Do I understand you to say, he said heavily when she had finished, that you have come here to the headquarters of a major general engaged in putting down a most unnatural and flagrant rebellion, merely to request that your lodger be moved across the hall? It seemed a fair enough summation of her mission. Yes, she said. He opened his mouth, closed again, rolled his eyes ceilingward, and muttered something about the very children. Then he went into the parlor where he borrowed a quill from one of the scribblers and scrawled a brief note. Is there any other service we can perform before you leave? He inquired sarcastically as he handed it to her. Rebecca shook her head. She didn't know what he'd written, but just in case, she cursed it and said thank you. A moment later she was outside. She hustled Peter around the corner of Spruce Street and unfolded the note. It was addressed to Captain G. Cargill, Esquire. His lordship's compliments, it said with a flourish, and a word to request that you accede to the family's preference in regard to choice of quarters. He feels that it is pointless to insist on prerogatives in small matters. Your obedient servant, F. Walden, A.B.C. It was a request and not an order, but it would surely take a very bold casting indeed to disregard the request of a major general. Rebecca was so pleased with herself that she skipped the rest of the way home. Foraging. Chapter 5. There followed a period of peace, or what, after the hectic first 24 hours, seemed like peace to Rebecca. Of course, the 10 minutes following her presentation to Captain Cargill of Captain Walden's note were lively ones. Their lodger cursed freely, called her a condemned rebel pup, and spent the rest of the day venting his anger on poor Stowe, who had to move his master's baggage to new quarters for the third time in one day. Just to be obnoxious, Cargill took over Tom's old room as well and installed Stowe there along with some baggage. But thereafter things fell into routine, and by the end of the week they had gotten quite used to being occupied. There was a good deal of furious military activity on all sides. Batteries were manned above and below the city, redoubts thrown up here and there. On the day Rebecca visited headquarters, some state ships attempted to run past Philadelphia to reach safety in the upper river, but were beaten back by artillery fire, and some of them set afire. Parties were hard at work at a line of fortifications to the north of the city, from the Delaware to the Schuylkill, and from time to time there'd be the distant rattle of musketry from skirmishing pickets. 2 days after Cornwallis's entry, General Howe himself visited the city. Rebecca took the two children to see him ride in, a black-eyed, swarthy man, tall and well-built, and sporting a most tremendous nose. Well, Rebecca said aloud, though mostly to herself, he doesn't act much like the lordly conqueror. Give him that much. He nodded affably left and right, and listened good-naturedly to his officers, who were all talking away merrily and pointing out the sights. Later he rode back to the main body of his troops at Germantown, 5 miles north of the city, and that afternoon proclamations were posted at all the important taverns, offering amnesty to all who would forswear the rebel cause and return their allegiance to King George. There were a number of takers. At the ransom house, Captain Cargill came and went with a good deal of banging and surly bellows for Stowe, who seemed resigned to life as a human doormat. Rebecca found that, if she timed it just right, she could get the children and herself up and washed and dressed, and be downstairs having breakfast when the captain rose. He ate his meals at the Three Crowns Tavern around the corner, and sometimes his military duties, not to mention a spot of roistering, kept him away until long after dark, so they hardly saw the man. They heard him, of course. No matter how late he returned, he would bang with his fist on the street door and bawl, "Go! Your eyes! Open up there!" And then bang, stamp, clatter, up the stairs, and more bellows as Stowe got him ready for bed. Ursula stood it for 4 nights. Then she came storming down from the garret in her nightdress and a shawl, and shrilled at the officer in German and English. "Men, Schultz, du Bitch, Rig, Vu, Machen, Gecken, Kleinen Kinder. Shame on you, making war on little children. What gives you to come in, you ugly great man, and wake up little children in the night? Hold your tongue, or I'll have you whipped." "Whipped!" she screamed. "Me? You have whipped? I am not one of your redcoats to be beaten like a dog. I go to your officer, that's what. I tell him what kind of fine gentleman he has in his army." They slanged away at each other a good deal more. Captain Cargill seemed not the slightest bit impressed with her threats at the time. The next morning, Stowe sidled up to Ursula, begged her pardon, and asked could she kindly direct him to a locksmith who could make a front door key. Thereafter, though the captain was far from quiet, there were no more midnight yelling. But their lodger was only a nuisance. The family's real problem at the moment was money to live on. It was ridiculous to be low on cash, while you were walking up and down stairs on 3,000,000 liras in gold. But there it was. They were down to their last 2 pounds in silver, their last $100 in paper, amounts of equal value. A dozen times a day Rebecca kicked herself for having forgotten to dun William. "We must sell the brandy," Ursula said at a council of war held in the kitchen one morning. "I don't dare just yet. They've issued a proclamation to report all rum and spirits to the quartermaster general, which probably means they intend to confiscate. They never find it, the dumbheads. Still, I'd rather wait." "But what else, Miss Rebecca?" "Well, I thought I could go out in the country and see if I could find apples or some such things to keep us going. Where you go, on every road is the Verdum redcoat. And the farmers, you know, they don't like this. The rule in Pennsylvania was that you could pick as much of someone else's fruit as you could eat on the premises, but if you carried away anything, that was stealing." "I was expecting not to get caught," said Rebecca, "but maybe you're right." Not for the first time. She wished that her mother, in laying out their garden, had gone a little more heavily for cabbages than cabbage roses. Ursula had made jam of the rose hips and some crab apples from the tree that overhung the well. The rose hip jam doesn't stick well to the ribs, and there was too little sugar to do it properly anyway. Also, we are needed needing some more wood. With Tom gone, Ursula threw up her hands. That much I can get, Rebecca brightened. And maybe we can find some hickories in the woods. Wood was getting to be a serious problem. Usually they bought their winter's supply in August when the farmers shipped shallop loads down from Morris County, but they had been too short of money then and had put it off in hopes that the huntress would return. Periodically Tom would take a box sled and a hatch and tramp through the governor's woods, picking up falling branches and lopping off small boughs. It kept them in cooking fuel at least. Now, though, winter was near. Already they had chilly days, and by the end of October it would be bitter indeed. The soldiers, they know where to go for wood, Ursula said with a bitter laugh. True. Fence posts, palings, palings, many of the cedar posts, doors of empty houses, anything of wood was material for their cook fires, and they chopped away with abandon. In Boston they had dismantled the search for firewood. We may come to it ourselves, Rebecca replied. I think I'll take Amelia. Carrying the hatchet and dragging the sled, the girls set out for the country. But first, for curiosity's sake, they strolled up Walnut to Fifth to take a peek at the soldiers encamped on the State House grounds. It looked very queer, all those canvas tents and horse lines and the farriers at work, and overhead the serene white steeple of the hall. Independence had been voted outside those walls just the summer before last. Then on July 8th at 11 in the morning, Sheriff John Nixon mounted the platform, erected in the State House yard by the Philosophical Society for Mr. Rittenhouse's astronomical observations, and read the Declaration. When in the course of human events, very grand it was, all rolling periods. And some of the listeners had cheered, and others had looked at one another and wondered about what was going to happen. And later that day the King's Arms were taking down the courtroom in the hall. And later that day the King's Arms were taken down from the courtroom in the hall, carried to the London coffee house at Front and Market, tossed on a pile of casks, and burned in the public street. And that night the Liberty people celebrated. Now, 15 months later, the enemy was encamped on the State House grounds. The men who had signed the Declaration were scattered as far as France. Rebecca had never admitted it to anyone, least of all to her father, but the news had frightened her. How could they be independent of the government back home? What would they do for a king? Then, a year later, Congress had voted away the Grand Union flag, replacing the Union Jack of the canton with a wreath of stars, and she hated it. That's not my flag, she had told herself, but now she missed it, and the familiar Union Jack on the regimental flag staff seemed alien and new. Rebecca gave herself a shake. This wasn't getting them their firewood. As they set off down Fifth, Rebecca noticed two more ransacked houses. She was just going to comment on this angrily when they encountered a marching file of artillerymen, and the corporal touched his hat to them, and somehow this stopped her mouth. Look, he saluted us, Amelia said, inevitably. Did you see that? He touched his hat. Why did they touch his hat, Rebecca? They must have orders to be on their best behavior. Here's Graves Ferry Road. More tents appeared on Society Hill, to the south of the city, and still more on the grounds of the Bettering House, the Quakers' Charity Home, out in the country near Pennsylvania Hospital. The Broadgrins couldn't be happy about that. Where the road neared the Schuylkill, it was lined with woods, and when they walked about a mile, they left the road and divided into thickets. Wood gathering naturally made Rebecca think of Tom, and she wondered if he had made it through the British lines, if he had found General Wayne, if he had enlisted, if he was all right. And as she was thinking about Tom, she almost had an idea. That is, she knew an idea was there, but before it quite had time to come out and be recognized, other worries crowded it again to the back of her mind. Being head of the family seemed to consist chiefly of worry. About Will now. He and Teddy got down to the Cape safely. Had he and Teddy got down to the Cape safely? Had they rendezvoused without getting caught by the patrolling frigate? Had the schooner made it to Charleston? If it had, how long before she could expect Will's messenger? A month at the very earliest, more likely 2 months. How could she possibly last 2 months as the sole owner of this momentous secret? And there was the nagging question of the brandy, too. How did one go about selling brandy? You couldn't just walk up to an officer on the street and say, "Do you want to buy some brandy?" Even if you could be sure he wouldn't arrest you for not having declared it. Maddening. Rebecca straightened to ease her protesting back. Pickings were certainly slim. They weren't the only family that had been getting fuel from the woods. All the lower branches, which might have been within Rebecca's reach, had been lopped off, and the ground had been thoroughly gleaned. Indeed, whole trees had been chopped down, and a party of soldiers was hard at work nearby, felling more and cutting them into cordwood. "I wish we could go to the woods by Frigatesburg," Rebecca said, frustrated, "but that's north of the lines, and I doubt they'd give us a pass. Come on, we'll try Moyamensing." They turned at the fork and trudged south and east, gleaned some in the Moyamensing woods, then swung north again toward Walnut Grove, Joseph Wharton's mansion just south of town. It turned out to be a lucky choice. The old Quaker was recently dead, and his family had temporarily abandoned the property. But that did not stop the walnut trees from bearing as usual. Rebecca found the ground thick with the great round green nuts, and they filled the sack they had brought with both their aprons. "Look, Rebecca, there are lots of sticks here. See, look at them all, Rebecca." Yes, they gathered what was lying on the ground, and they stood and looked at the low branches. It was one thing to prune the woods, which, if they belonged to anybody, belonged to the Penn family, and therefore were practically public. It was quite another to cut wood on private property. At length Rebecca consoled herself with the thought that new branches would soon grow, and before long the sled was filled. They started back. It was hard going with the loaded sled. Rebecca's arms were aching long before they left the dust of the road for the cobbles of Third Street. And then the panting Amelia gave and when the panting Amelia gave up and left it all to her, she hadn't the heart to object. They hadn't taken six steps along Third Street before someone stopped them. Rebecca looked up in fright, but it was only Donald, the huge sentry. "Up, yon is na a load for a wee lass like yourself," he said, brushing her aside like a gnat, and grabbing the tow rope. "Which way would it be now?" "Why, straight ahead. It's really awfully kind of you." "'Tis not a feather." And indeed the sled did fairly fly along behind Donald's check stockings and swinging kilt. But Rebecca wanted to ask him a million questions, beginning with, "Are Highlanders really wild?" but she couldn't think of a polite way to frame them. Amelia had no such qualms. "You're Scotch, aren't you? That's why you wear a skirt, isn't it?" "Aye, that's why," he replied cheerfully. "Everybody says Highlanders are howling savages, just like Indians." "Are you a howling savage?" "That I am." And throwing back his head, he gave a ferocious yowl. Do you eat people too? Indians eat people sometimes." "Huh?" he said. "No, but twice or thrice in a year, and I dinna like Americans. Unco tough they are entirely." Amelia eyed him with suspicion, but he kept his face quite straight. "Why do you wear that funny hat?" she said after a moment. "My bonnet? Why, what else would a Scotsman—" He broke off at a slight at the sight of a soldier marching off at gunpoint by two others. "Ech," she said soberly, "they have caught another looter. 'Twill gang hard with him, nae doubt, no doubt, no doubt, no doubt. Hard? Aye, 400 lashes frae the last, and mayhap the firing squad for the next." "The firing squad!" Rebecca echoed in horror. "Aye, the generals are hot to stop it, ane way or another." He shrugged philosophically. "That was the army. Yon will be the house, eh?" "Yes, it is." Donald drew the sleigh through the white wooden gate into the Ransoms' brick-paved side yard and carried wood and walnuts down the steps to the kitchen, which had an outside door. Rebecca thanked him profusely. He grinned and pretended to examine Amelia in the light of a future meal, then bounded up the steps 3 at a time and vanished. Although in the moment he disappeared, Rebecca's idea broke through, the one that had been conceived, though not born, while she was thinking of Tom. Perhaps the talk of looters had helped it along, for she was planning to do a little looting of sorts herself. She waited till late afternoon. The soldiers were paraded morning and evening, and would be off the streets at that time. The day was damp and misty, but she wanted to take as few chances of being seen as possible. Then, armed with lantern, tinderbox, a heavy knife, and some sacks, she set out, walking swiftly for the Coburn house. "One of their side shutters has a weak catch," Tom had said. She hoped she could find it without trouble. She hoped the house contained something worth breaking in for. There it was now. She glanced swiftly up and down the street. Just some Quaker ladies heading for Market Street Meeting House. She pushed open the gate and shut it quickly behind her. The house loomed up in the gray light, 3 stories like the Ransoms, and with the same brick-paved side yard, but shuttered and forbidden.